Hi guys, if you're watching this video, you're probably thinking of relocating to Boston. So in today's video, I'm going to give you the 5 pros and the 5 cons of moving to or living in Boston. My name is Frank Carroll of the Frank Carroll Homes team at Compass. Please be sure to look below for my contact information. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and add notifications. This is what I love to do. I love to help you. Any questions you have, any comments, please let me know. I've been doing this for 25 years and I love to share my experience and my knowledge with you. Pro number 1 of living in Boston. Boston is one of the most walkable cities in the country. It is also one of the oldest cities, so it is a pleasure to walk through. There's plenty of beautiful architecture, lots of green space and trees. It has the Freedom Trail, which is one of the oldest paths you can walk in the country, full of history. There are plenty of connected parkways. You could basically walk around the Charles River, the Esplanade, the Harbor Walk, which is around the waterfront area. There's a Southwest Corridor Park, which goes from the South End to Jamaica Plain for miles. So this is just a wonderful city to walk in. Even though we have a bad reputation for weather, there are plenty of nice days and plenty of variable walks you can do that will keep things very interesting, because this city is very, very variable as far as like the areas change very, very quickly, and each one has a different flavor to it. And it's just such a wonderful city to walk through. I love living here because of how rich it just looks when you're walking around the city, you know? Pro number 2 of living in Boston. Boston is full of amazing culture. Given that it has so many universities here and has such a history, there are many great institutions like the Museum of Fine Arts, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, plenty of museums just a short drive outside of the city, like the Peabody Essex Museum. We have Symphony Hall. We have an excellent music scene with Berklee College of Music and the New England Conservatory very close by. We have just an incredible selection of things to do in the city, in addition to the opera, in addition to theaters, the theater district. Harvard University has plenty of cultural options like the Harvard Art Museums, the Bush Reinsinger Galleries. I mean, there's just some incredibly world caliber places in this city, given the intellectual caliber and the diversity that we have here. And that lends as well to many other aspects of living here with variable cultures that are showcased. Pro number 3 of living in Boston. This is not a big surprise. Boston has one of the best food scenes in the entire country. And this is one of the reasons why I love living here as a foodie, as a born New Yorker. I have high standards for my food, and Boston has met them. So the nice thing about Boston is you have so many cultures here, with kids going to college from all over the world. You have all these people that relocate from other parts of the world and the country, different cultures. They want their food to be good. So we have the North End, which is full of Italian restaurants and great desserts and pastries. We have the South End, which has a very huge variety of restaurants with different types of food. Italian, Turkish, there's Cava, there's SRV, there's Alona. There's endless options. There's a SOA market every Sunday in the summertime, which has food stalls and food trucks. We have farmers markets all over the place in Copley Square, in the North End, at Haymarket. We have food festivals. We have great bars here. And we have chefs that are James Beard Award winners. We have Blackbird Donuts, which is my favorite donut place in Boston. There's Toscanini's ice cream. There's modern pastry in the North End. So if you have a sweet tooth and if you like delicious food and your standards are very high, you will be very happy here, because this scene is thriving and constantly changing. And I have to say, I've been to many places in the world, and Boston never disappoints. Pro number 4 of living in Boston. I have to say, this is one of the best things for this city, is the job market is so healthy and we have such a diversity of industries in the city. I think that the medical field is a big part of it. There's a lot of pharmaceutical companies, A lot of the world's best hospitals are here, like Mass General Hospital, Harvard University's hospitals, Tufts Medical Center, BU Medical Center. We have great tech companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook that are all located here. We have Kendall Square by MIT, which has led to many new industries growing very quickly, especially the pharma industry. So what I'm saying is the job market is great here. No matter what you're doing, whether you're in tech, whether you're in medicine, whether you're in theater, whether you're in advertising, we have great financial sector here as well, downtown, venture capital firms. We have just a great diversity. So if you do move here, number one, you have some amazing companies you can work for. And number two, if you decide to change your industry where you're working, you can always find something else to do that and other options. And I have to say, like, other cities in the country don't have our diversity. And this is why the real estate market has maintained its value for so long, because if one industry is not doing as well, there's always another 10 to take up the slack and keep the economy thriving here. Pro tip number 5 of living in Boston. One thing that is so great about the city is there's always something to do here. There's always some event going on. We have the Head of the Charles in October. We have first night for New Year's Eve in Copley Square, which is huge. We have the 4th of July fireworks. We have music festivals like Boston Calling. We have just so many great festivals and events that happen regularly throughout the entire year, no matter if it's the winter or the summer. So I just never get bored here. There's always something. You can Google what's going on in Boston today. You probably have like dozens of options to do. Not to mention the cultural activities, not to mention the theater, all the performances, all the things that are seasonal here. Also leaving the city, if you want to just drive 15 or 20 minutes or an hour, you have more options for that as well, for more events. So what I'm saying is this part of New England is such a great area because it is the capital of all the events that happen. Like if it's going to happen in New England, there's a very good chance it will be in Boston or greater Boston. So more reason to move here. Now for the cons. So con number 1 of living in Boston. If you remember, the pro number 1 was the walkability of Boston. So if you're going to have a car, there are consequences. Number 1 being the traffic is horrendous or it can be horrendous because the streets here are very narrow. They're not really designed for cars. They were designed for horse and carriages because that's how old the city is. So very little of the city is grid-like, only certain sections are grid-like. So be prepared for traffic jams because basically there's too many cars and not enough roads, or the roads aren't wide enough, and that's what happens. So there's definitely going to be a lot of traffic and an occasional road rage that you may encounter. So people, when they're behind the wheel, you can be a nun in Boston and be the sweetest nun in the world, but the minute you get behind the wheel, you become the demon nun, okay? So you definitely want to be defensive when you're driving because people will be very unpredictable. Having a car is definitely stressful. If you don't have a car, your life will be better. Parking as well is another issue because parking is not only expensive, but hard to find. So if you have to bring your car or you have to move your car to a different part of the city, be prepared to either pay for it or get stressed out looking for a parking space. And the other thing I should mention is the roads can be kind of poor, potholes, because this city, the weather varies very widely. So it could be 0 degrees one day and the next day 50 degrees. So because of that, roads are freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing. There are potholes. So if you do get a car, get a tire plan. So your tires are covered for being changed every time you have a flat tire. So that's what I'm saying is don't get a car unless you have to have one, because that's one of the biggest cons of Boston is driving and having a car. Con number 2 of living in Boston has to be the cost of living. So not only is the real estate very expensive, I think we're the 3rd or the 4th most expensive city in the United States for real estate prices, not only rental prices, but also condo and house purchase prices. You know, the average condo in the metro Boston area could be $1 million if you're in the Back Bay or South End area, to give you an example. And in general, Boston is 48% more expensive cost of living than the rest of the country, the average part of the country. So my point is, not only is the housing expensive, but also cost of living is expensive. So public transportation could cost more money, food costs more money, gas costs more money, everything sort of adds up. So the plus side is, if you're living in Boston, you probably have a pretty well-paying job or dual income to be able to afford the costs of living here. But definitely beware that it is expensive. Maybe not as expensive as New York City, but we're definitely on a similar level. And that's, I feel like the other aspects of the city make up for the cost of living, but it's definitely one of its biggest negatives. Con number 3 of living in Boston. As everyone would guess, it's the weather. The weather is wildly unpredictable. It changes very frequently from one day to the next. We're situated right on the edge of the water, pretty much. If you look at a map, we're surrounded by water in some parts of Boston. So because of that, we have nor'easters. We're in the path of the Gulf Stream. We have an occasional hurricane that comes through this area. We can have very rough winter days, although it's been pretty okay the last couple of years, knock on wood, but we've had the year 2015 where we had over 10 feet of snow. So you never know what's gonna happen with this city. So my rule of thumb is, if you're gonna go on vacation in the wintertime and get away from Boston. And if you're gonna try to pick a month to do it in like February, which is the worst month of the whole year for weather. So it's one of my biggest complaints about living here is the weather, but at the same time, there are some beautiful days. It's just that you have to be prepared not to have consistency. This is not Los Angeles, where it's sunny like whatever 98% of the year. This is Boston, and this is why you will be toughened up living here after you deal with the weather here. Con number 4 of living in Boston. I would say this doesn't really affect me personally because I drive and walk mostly, but public transportation in this city is definitely antiquated. Some of the oldest subway tunnels in the entire country are here. We have an elevated train that sometimes is above ground, sometimes it's below ground. So if the weather's bad, it could affect the train service. The other thing is public transportation shuts down completely at 1 in the morning. So if you're going out drinking or going out, you have to be prepared to take an Uber if it's after 1 in the morning. So that's one of the biggest cons, is definitely public transportation. It's not as good as cities like DC or New York, where it's more round the clock and a little bit more sophisticated as far as the routes. So I also wish that we had more trains that went to different places here. We have what's called the Green Line extension, which is going to go into Somerville and Cambridge, which will improve the system a little bit, but still, it's definitely a big drawback of living here, is how long it takes to take the train. Sometimes it's not on time, and basically how old the system is, and sometimes it stops randomly. So anyway, if you have to commute to work, you better have a buffer of extra time to get there. Con number 5 of living in Boston has to be the density of the city. By that I mean not only the population density, but also the way the buildings are laid out. For example, in the North End area, which is one of the oldest parts of Boston, the buildings are literally right behind each other. So when you open up your window, there's another window that's probably 5 feet away, so you can hand your neighbor food if you wanted to across the courtyard, because it's that close to each other. Same thing with Beacon Hill, another very historic area of Boston where all the buildings are close to each other. You may not have good light in your apartment because it's blocked by another building. That also lends to the whole traffic situation, because the streets are very narrow. So that leads to a lot of people crowding some streets in areas like Newbury Street, which is a big shopping street in Boston, in the Back Bay. Shopping malls, because it's a concentrated area downtown, and a lot of people are visiting here, there are tourists here, there are students here, it could definitely clog up the city, especially today in the age of COVID. People are very sensitive about that, so it is one of the biggest cons. But the plus side is, if you don't like crowds, there's plenty of other options, plenty of other parks, the Greenway, there's the Emerald Necklace, places where you can get away from people. So that's a wrap on the pros and cons of living in Boston. If you would like to get a hold of me, you can text, email, or call me anytime. Any questions you have, I'm more than happy to answer. I'm really a proud resident of this city. I would love to help you with your real estate needs, whether it's renting or buying or selling. So please keep me in mind, subscribe to my channel, set the notifications, and you have my contact info to get a hold of me.